Armando Hassurungan, biology and medicine videos. Please make sure to subscribe. Join the forum and group for the latest videos. Please visit Facebook Armando Hassurungan. Please like, and here you can also ask questions, answer questions, and post some interesting things, including your artworks. And you can also change the quality settings to the highest one for better graphics. In this video, we're going to look at the heart physiology and how the heart pumps out blood. So, just recapping, this is our heart. As we all know, the heart works like a pump, which pumps blood around the body. Let's have a closer look at the heart and the circulation of the blood coming to and from the heart. First of all, we'll look at a cross-sectional view of the heart. The heart consists of 4 chambers, if you remember. The right atrium, the right ventricle, the left atrium, and the left ventricle. These 4 chambers are important because blood passes through them within the heart. The ventricles are important because the ventricles are the one which essentially pumps blood out of the heart, and so they need to be strong. And so they contain most of the cardiac muscle cells, here in black. After oxygen has been used by the body tissues, the blood supply will be deoxygenated. It will be in low oxygen and it will have higher concentrations of carbon dioxide. This deoxygenated blood supply will then travel back into the heart through the vena cava, and it will enter into the right atrium. The blood will then go into the right ventricle. The right ventricle will then pump out the blood through the pulmonary artery towards the lungs, where it will be reoxygenated. So now the blood supply has oxygen in it. This reoxygenated blood supply will travel through the pulmonary vein back towards the heart and enter the left atrium. The left ventricle, which contains most of the cardiac muscle cells, will then pump this oxygenated rich blood through the aorta towards the rest of the body, to other body tissues. And so this circulation continues. The circulation from the heart, between the heart and the lungs, is known as a pulmonary circulation, and between the heart and the body tissues is known as a systemic circulation. Now, in order for the heart to eject blood or pump blood out, there is contraction of cardiac muscles, and this is triggered by action potentials. So let's have a look at the cardiac muscle cells. The cardiac muscle cells are different from the smooth muscles or the skeletal muscles, but they have some similarities. For example, the cardiac muscles are also striated, like the skeletal muscles. They contain 1 nucleus per cell, usually. So they're mononucleated. And they look something like this. This is a magnified view. Another important feature cardiac muscles possess that differs it from skeletal muscle, for example, is that they have intercalated discs, junctions which separate each cardiac muscle cell. And these intercalated discs, these allow the cardiac muscle cells to contract in unison. So if one cardiac muscle cells contract, all cardiac muscle cells contract. And this is important to pump blood in unison around the body. Also, cardiac muscle cells contain T tubules and sarcoplasmic reticulum for calcium release. And so therefore calcium, as we know, is very important for muscle contraction. Now, we know that the cardiac muscle cells contract in response to an action potential. So let's look at this action potential of a cardiac muscle cell in the ventricle, for example. But before we look at an action potential, we have to understand a membrane potential and how an action potential changes a membrane potential. So let's have a quick look. Here we have a cell membrane of any type of cell, but for now we'll just say it's a cardiac muscle cell or cells within the heart. Now, the cells within the heart have a membrane potential. A membrane potential is the difference in electrical potential between the inside and the outside of the cell. And this is due to the different concentration of ions across the membrane. So different concentrations of ions in the outside in respect to the inside. Here we have the inside and here we have the outside of this heart cell. In the heart cells, at rest, essentially just after the heart has finished pumping the blood out, the inside of the cell membrane is negative in respect to the outside, and therefore the membrane potential is usually negative. And this is caused by the different distribution of ions across the membrane. So let's look at these ions, and there are three main ones that we're going to look at in the cardiac cells. So on the outside we have more calcium and sodium ions, which are usually positively charged, and on the inside we have more potassium ions, which are also positively charged. Now when these different ions move from one side to the other, they will change the membrane potential, of course. How do they move? Well, they move through these protein channels, protein pores. And so, therefore, when these ions move through these protein channels, specific protein channels, they will change the membrane potential. So, for example, here we have two protein channels for calcium ions. Calcium ions within the heart have two types of protein channels. They have an L type and they have a T type. So when these calcium channels move inside the cell from the outside through these protein channels, they will change the membrane potential. So let's look at a graph and try to understand this membrane potential process. So here we have a graph with time on the x-axis and the potential in millivolts on the y-axis. Remember that after the heart pumps out the blood, the membrane potential is usually negative. So here we have negative just after the heart pumps out the blood. But when these calcium channels open, for example, a T-type calcium channel opens, calcium will come in and will change the membrane potential to become more positive. And if the other calcium channel opens, the L-type calcium channel, this allows more calcium to come in and so change the membrane potential to become even more positive. Now, what's important to know and understand is that when these ion channels closes, this will cause the ions to move back to where they came from, either via pump or via some other means. And so the movement of these ions back to its original location will obviously change the membrane potential. Keep that in mind. So I hope you understand how the membrane potential changes within the heart cells. And so now we can go back into our main diagram and look at the action potential of a cardiac muscle cell and the changes in the membrane potential.